what we're going to be talking about is how to make your business cyber secure. So again, just a bit of repetition for those of you who are just joining us today. If you could just really indicate what you're really passionate about, why you do it. Everything has to revolve around the why to start with. And also be bold with your questions as well, because Rob would certainly like to hear from you. And no doubt you'll have a lot of insights to share as well. Those of you who are fairly regular to us will be well aware that we love to make a difference. We work very closely with our community. We're very passionate about helping our clients to win more business or bring sales forward, also to help them to elevate their brand, or amplify their brand, and get their time back. And obviously, we're very keen to show people the how and the right methodologies and systems so they can achieve great results. And a little bit of an introduction for myself to start with. So I founded Business Growth Bureau a bit over 7 years ago now. I am a great believer in building on what I class as the circular relationships. If we do that and make sure it's not just a win-win, but everyone actually wins out of that relationship, you end up by building a very strong business, but it also then ties in with a lot around my personal values. And also, I think Muriel, it's fair to say, it aligns very well with you as well. So Muriel, do you want to just give us a quick introduction into yourself, if that's all right?
Yes, hello to anybody who's new joining us. And it is David Rupert, actually. He doesn't have a Facebook account. So he's
I'm really confused. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
yes.
That's okay. Right, so I'm very keen and really enjoy working with people. I deal with the client side of Business Growth Bureau as well as other things, but I really do get a great sense of achievement to work with them and hopefully answer all the questions they have and make sure that they've got everything they need from us.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Muriel. Rob, if you could very kindly share a little bit about yourself as well. We'll dig a little bit deeper in just a moment or two. But would you be very kind just for a moment and share a little bit about your background, if that's okay? And I think everyone would be really interested to hear that.
Yeah, surely. So my background, I would say I'm a technologist. I did a master's degree in electrical engineering a long time ago. 26 years ago, and then I joined the government and been working for the national security and defence for the UK government. Did that for 17 years. I joined as a graduate, and I left about 7 years ago as a sort of program architect or enterprise architect type. I was very fortunate to be able to sort of remain technical throughout my whole career working in the government, and then for the last 7 years or so I've been doing cybersecurity professional services in one guise or another. At the moment I am the CEO of Red Maple Technologies, which is a boutique cybersecurity and digital transformation business in China.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much for that. And I understand as well, on speaking with you sort of previously, that there's been lots of opportunities for you over the last year or two, probably before the COVID scenario as well, mainly because perhaps some very big players are in this space who will tend to offer consultancy to other big players. And because of your high level of specialism, your firm is very blessed in the sense it actually picks up some of those contracts because you can offer a lot of unique value at probably quite a lower figure than some of the big players out there. Is that a fair description, Rob? It'd be good to understand that a little bit more in terms of what opportunities you've perhaps helped with.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone on the call or anyone on this session who is from the sort of the big four, the big five, but we set up Red Maple to almost be maybe the antithesis of sort of the big consulting firms. So we're values led, and we believe in trying to demystify cyber for businesses. We generally work with small to medium sized businesses, and as you say, we've actually seen a sort of almost a shift in client engagements where they've used the big four, they've used the big five before, and they just haven't got the value or haven't got the skills or haven't got the the outcome, the solution they've been looking for. And we've had clients come to us and say, look, we've pretty much come to you because you are small, you are bespoke, you are boutique, and actually we've engaged 4 or 5 different smaller SMEs to help us out, because we know what the big 5 offer, and even if it's sort of only one of us sort of finds a fair way, as it were, those clients still value that as a sort of almost as a process. So it's been an interesting journey for us. The old expression, no one gets fired for hiring IBM. I think those days are starting to maybe come to an end, and actually businesses like ourselves and others we work with, they can offer genuine specialisms. Our specialism is in cybersecurity, but there's so many other businesses, smaller businesses out there that offer deep specialisms, particularly technology and the startup space.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rob. That's great to have that introduction. So I think what we'll do is we'll focus a lot more on these type of areas here, if that's okay, Rob. And Muriel, if you could just very quietly monitor things behind the scenes for the moment, that'd be absolutely fantastic, if that's okay. So what would be really interesting, obviously the whole area of cybersecurity to, I suppose, many people, especially if they run a much smaller business, is, it may be perhaps they've had a problem with their bank where some fraudulent transactions have slipped through because someone else got their card details, or it could be that they've had some piece of malware affect their PC or something like that. Perhaps it was a very small business, can you give us a few examples of where people can really get caught out and possibly deal a little bit with some of the issues that come around that, especially where people are, these are much one way of Trojan horses of baitware that's being used now to try and get people to trick people into divulging their private information. So how can people protect themselves around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say the most common attack that we see is email phishing. So an unsolicited email or an email trying to get you to give over some personal information or give over your login credentials. So these often start with some kind of sort of social media sort of scanning, so picking up your LinkedIn profile, finding out your email, finding out your job title, so that the scammers, the attackers, can sort of craft a credible type email. The accounts department, accounts payable, is a very classic way into most organizations. A lot of companies will even have accounts payable at their domain name.com. Then so that sort of phishing scam, it is the most common way in, and the issue there is that people can craft some really quite convincing looking emails. And we had a client of ours not so long ago. They had an email claiming to be from Microsoft. It looked exactly like Microsoft. It took them to a web page which looked exactly like the Microsoft Office 365 sign-in. So they put in their username, which is their email address, and they put in their password for Office 365, and it didn't work. And this is human nature. They then put in a few other passwords. They thought, well, maybe it's not that password. Maybe it's a different one. And they actually ended up giving away 3 or 4 common passwords that they have used.
Wow.
Now, this website was fake. The email address that was supposed to be Microsoft wasn't. In Outlook, it looked like it came from Microsoft, and this is one of the problems. It renders the from field, and you can change that. You can basically put that anything you want. So it looked genuine, and she rang us up in a panic. The simplest thing there to do is make sure you got two-factor authentication enabled, which they did have. We had enabled that already, so we knew that the account wouldn't get compromised fully, but we could see the attacker had gone in and was trying to actively change her password, but was unable to because of the two-factor. And then it was a case of going around and changing your passwords for all the accounts that you think that may have been compromised, i.e., had that that username and that password associated with it. So that took maybe half an hour to an hour for sort of panicking about doing that. And then just to sort of about embraces, because we weren't sure ourselves whether this, this email and this web page maybe put some malicious software onto her computer. We didn't think it did, but we weren't sure. So this was during lockdown 2, and she was stuck in Italy, I think. So we said, okay, use our VPN, which we use with some of our clients, and it's a monitor VPN, so we monitor sort of the other end of it. So VPN, a virtual private network, so a secure connection over the internet. So we monitor that VPN for a week or so, and we didn't see any sort of what we call beacons. So if somebody puts some malware down onto your computer, it talks back to what's called a command and control server, basically a way for the attackers to interact with your computer. This goes over the internet, and you can often see these beacons, these pieces of traffic going to the malware server, to the command and control server. And we didn't see any of that. We also analysed the email and looked at sort of the headers and where the actual email really did come from, which turned out to be an overseas server and not from Microsoft. And we were able to sort of, we call it a detonation chamber, basically replay that email and replay that clicking the link in an environment where we can capture what's actually happened, and no malware was being downloaded. So sort of gave her the reassurance that nothing malicious happened. They were effectively saved by having 2-factor authentication on their accounts, and lessons learned.
Yeah,
be a little bit more patient, a little bit more cautious, and check that the sender really is the sender.
Yeah,
and there is a way of doing that. Outlook and a lot of email clients will make the email look very readable and in essence make it look pretty. But you can in Outlook right click on any message and go view source, and then you get a horrible text, really nasty text message. But there's one field called X-sender, and that's the real sender. And in this case, it was some bizarre email address at some bizarre domain name. And if you see that, you go, that's not Microsoft.
Yeah.
That one's going to the spam bin.
Right. Yeah. Nasty. In fact, I've noticed as well what seems to be happening a lot too is certainly I've received a few of those, is where you're getting texts as well which contain what appears to be genuine web links, and what they seem to do now is they'll register. Obviously, what they're doing is they've got a domain. They'll register hundreds of subdomains, which happen to have the name O2 in it, or HSBC, or whatever it might be as well. And of course, if you click on that, and then now it's getting very sophisticated, it almost seems to create a replica of the homepage of the website. So it is something which we definitely all should be aware of. But thank you for sharing that, because I think that's a big concern for any business and for any individual, really, isn't it? So, what would you say are some really good examples in business where people can protect themselves? What would be some top tips around that in terms of how they can protect themselves?
Okay, so my top tips, particularly for small businesses, I think the first 3 are pretty much all sort of equal number 1. I would say cloud services these days are more secure than on-premises. On the balance of probability, your Googles, your Microsofts of this world, they spend an enormous amount of money protecting their services. So I think I read somewhere that Microsoft spend about $1 billion a quarter on Office 365 and SharePoint security, just on security. So, if you want to stand tall, stand on the shoulders of giants. So use cloud services wherever you can. They are not, perfect. Google went down for half an hour a few weeks ago. Bit unheard of. Amazon's has had outages, and Microsoft had for a few days a 0-day vulnerability in their online exchange server that they were scrubbing around to fix. So it's not a silver bullet, but it is. What I say to our clients is, on the balance of probability, it is more secure to use those services, and keeping your data in the cloud and not having so much data on your end devices. You can start to move to sort of more advanced concept like zero trust, which we might get into a bit later. So that's sort of number 1. Number 2, would be to use a password manager. So on your smartphone, LastPass, 1Password, something like that, and manage your passwords on a password manager, because you want to have different passwords for different services. So another really common attack vector for cyber criminals is trawling data breaches with known username and passwords in. So you can go to a website called haveibeenpwned.com. Pwned is spelled P-W-N-D. And it's actually
sorry, if you're hearing in the background, if you could very kindly put that in the chat, if that's all right. Can you just give that URL again, actually, Rob, if that's all right?
Yeah, it's haveibeenpwned, with pwned spelled P-W-N-D.com. It's run by a chap called Troy Hunt. Troy's got a great podcast, and he's a bit of a legend in the cybersecurity circles, an Australian gentleman. Anyway, he runs that site. And what he does is basically collate all the data breaches from all around the world globally and stores them in a database. And then anyone, I can just put your email address in and see if you have been in a data breach. Now, my personal email address I've had since I was a student. It's an old Gmail account, and I've been in 17 data breaches in the last 25 years. Nothing I could do about it. LinkedIn got hacked. All the usernames and all the passwords all got published on the web. And nothing I could do about it. But had I used that LinkedIn, the password I used for LinkedIn for another website, like my Gmail account, so the attackers know my Gmail email address and they know a password I've used for LinkedIn. Now, human nature, I might reuse that password, or I might reuse a password that's similar. It's got a 1 on the end, or it starts with a different number, or ends with a different, and you can start to brute force these passwords and basically guess at other services. Have I used the same password for Xero? Have I used the same password for banking? Have I used the same password for other things? So that is a really easy way in for attackers. And again, if you look at the website, the last time I looked at it just before Christmas, and it had 8 billion unique username and passwords. There's only 7 billion. Yeah, 8 billion. 8 billion. There's only 7 billion people. So most people have more than one email address, to be fair. But I mean, that's like one breach per person on the planet, plus a few. So there's a lot of data in there. And if you reuse passwords between systems, i.e. you don't use a password manager to manage complex systems, then it's very easy for attackers to go to website, find the same data breaches that Troy Hunt finds, and basically replay those passwords into pick a service, any service. This is where the third tip would be, if possible, always use second factor authentication. So banks have been using second factor 2FA, sometimes called MFAs, and multi-factor authentication for some time. So a very typical multi-factor authentication would be you log into your bank with your username, your password, and then they send you a text message with a unique code, and you enter that text message into the login stream for the bank, and then you get into your account. So they know your phone number. They assume that you have your phone. So it's just an extra piece of data that is unique to you. And the MFA code, the two-factor authentication code, changes regularly. So every single time you request a login to your bank, you'll get a different code. The same technique is used for authenticator apps. So Google have a really good authenticator app. Authy.com have a really good authenticator app. Google have a really good authenticator app. And the mobile phone apps tend to use a QR code. So you go on to Amazon, or you go on to any of the Microsoft services, and you say, enable second factor authentication, come up with a QR code, you open up your chosen app. And the nice thing is you can use almost any app with any 2FA. If it's a QR code, it'll be a common mechanism. You scan the QR code, and that's it. It's literally like it's done. And then you just enter those codes. You can see they change every 30 seconds. And then you just type that code into your website, whatever you're using. So the top 3, and I'd say no, for me, no real reason. Especially small businesses, they're pretty much free, easy to set up. The next few would be if you do have your smartphone set up by, and you can set up by, biometric access, like Face ID on your iPhone, thumbprint on your Pixels. In fact, I think they do Face ID on Pixels as well now. Now, with a password app on your phone and all your passwords in your password app on your phone now suddenly becomes really quite important because it's got all your passwords on. So using biometrics, if you forget to set a PIN, or someone knows your PIN, or it's an easy to guess PIN and you lose your phone, you are also losing all your passwords to all your accounts. So I recognize there's a trade-off there.
Yes.
You are putting all your eggs in one basket in one way in your smartphone, and it does kind of ensure that you have to then look after your smartphone a little bit more carefully. Yeah. But I think these days, just our culture, certainly the way, I've always got my smartphone on me. I don't let my daughter play with it. She's got her own smartphone. I don't tell my friends, my PIN number. The days of passing your phone around in the pub of, people taking photos and all sorts of things. Just, don't do that anymore. So look after your smartphone, and if it supports biometrics, support biometric. If it doesn't support, set your PIN number to be more than 4 digits. Try it to be 6 to 8 digits. Yeah,
that makes sense. In fact, interestingly enough, our son, was about a year or so back. Actually, it was more than a year ago because it was pre-COVID. I was very into clubbing because he's age 24 now. He was 23 at the time. But he and one of his mates and 2 young ladies went clubbing. Came out about 2 or 3 in the morning, and Sam, our son, got out his phone to call an Uber, as you do when you've just come out of a club, to try and get back home again. And someone saw him with his phone, and these 2 lads came and saw him with his phone as hoodies, as it were, and came up from behind him and said, I basically got a knife, and held it to his back. Now, whether it was a knife or not, he didn't know because they were wearing a jacket, and he felt something sharp in his back, and he certainly wasn't going to argue with them. And the thing that was, and obviously looking back on it, it's not funny at all, but you look back on it, and it's with some mild humor, I guess, as it were. But he, of course, did the sensible thing and handed his phone over. It's all you could do. And the funny thing is, his friend, they took his phone and said, "Oh, that's no good," and handed it back to him. It's one of the very, very cheap one, hands there, which they didn't want. Our son had an iPhone, and they immediately then held this iPhone up to his face, which of course unlocked the iPhone. And of course they then wanted him to wipe it as well. So fortunately, that's quite a good thing, because at least it was reset, all this, you haven't got to worry about the security side. But the very fact of holding the phone up to the face to unlock it, they're quite smart. They'd obviously done it many times before. So it is one of these things you can do your best to protect yourself in these circumstances. But I can understand what you mean about two-factor authentication, and I do agree things like Face ID and all these, everything like this, is a really good thing to do. So those are some really, really good tips, actually. If you were dealing with perhaps with a larger company, say more of a corporate or a company where they're perhaps employing more than 100 people or so, what are some of the threats that may pretend to particularly expose those organizations to extra risk? Is it the fact that perhaps their databases aren't as secure as they should be, or they're not encrypting their passwords, and all this type of stuff? What are some common examples which you come across where businesses are quite exposed? And of course, there's massive fines to be had there from the Information Commissioner's Office as well, too, isn't there, if things go a bit wrong?
You got your GDPR and your ICO, your fines for breaching or losing personal information these days. So for corporates, for bigger organisations, you sort of 100 plus, 1,000 plus, 50,000 plus. So the common themes that we see in bigger organisations, older organisations, is legacy and complexity. So legacy, they will have typically a mixture of on-premise servers. They'll be using some cloud services. They'll have firewalls. They have, firewalls from many different vendors. They'll have databases in their, on-premise data center or even a third-party data center that go back to the 80s and 90s. That no one knows how they work. No one can change the code. That it's too fragile. Written in COBOL and really old-fashioned languages that no one understands anymore. No one programs it anymore. But it's mission critical, and they can't turn it off. They can't migrate it, and they're stuck with it. And it basically generates just a lot of stuff. And there's a paradigm in cybersecurity called defense in depth. And the idea there is you sort of got your onion layers, and this is, sort of your classic, also called, walled garden, this sort of another paradigm where you've got your corporate network, you've got your big firewalls, you've got your customers on the outside, and you've got you on the inside. And you protect, that's the walled garden. You protect your firewall, or you monitor and manage your firewall. And everything on the inside is trusted, and everything outside is not trusted, is untrusted. That paradigm has changed. That paradigm it does exist now, and it kind of exists more with bigger corporates, because they can't just throw all their infrastructure and move to the cloud overnight. It takes years and years and years. Been working with big high street banks, and they've had 20-year migration plans. Literally, like NatWest Bank have been doing this for 26 years and still haven't achieved it. That's not one of our clients, by the way. You can read that in a white paper. It does take decades to move these services, and then you've got challenger banks like Monzo and Starling and stuff that just spring up using brand new technology. They're cloud native. They're on the cloud. It takes 30 seconds to open an account. They've got no branches, no staff, no legacy at all, and they can just absolutely smash the financial services market because they can offer all these cool new services, and they can roll out new services every month because they're on modern technology. So there's a problem with legacy. There's a problem with complexity. And there's no silver bullet to those problems. Complexity, it's expensive to maintain, it's expensive to manage, it's expensive to operate. You tend to have an army of people sort of in your security operations centers, your SOCs, your network operations centers, your NOCs, to just keep the ship going, and to change the direction is an awful lot of energy needed to even make a small change. So they are really big challenges for enterprises. And one of the solutions that's talked about a lot these days is, and I mentioned it earlier on, is called zero trust. So if you remember the walled garden analogy, where untrusted on the outside, trusted on the inside, well, that inside has become very very amorphous. So if you've got a banking analyst or a banking clerk who's working from home because of COVID, and they've taken their corporate device home, and they're connecting to the corporate network over a virtual private network, over a VPN, over their home Wi-Fi and their home BT or Virgin, whatever, internet connection. Well, they're kind of outside the wall, but they're kind of inside because they're going over a VPN. So do you trust that device, or do you not trust that device? If it's become a lot more complicated. And what zero trust paradigm is that no one trusts anything, and every single service needs to authenticate every single time it tries to do anything. But you need to use modern authentication protocols. You need to use modern applications. You need to, and everything has to use it as well. So it's kind of a big bang migration to move from a walled garden to zero trust. So again, it's a complex and time-consuming endeavor to make. So that's what we see in sort of big corporates. We do a lot of work with financial services. That's one of our major clients, and we sort of see both sides of it. We work quite a lot with challenger banks and fintech. So brand new startups, open banking, we've got a great idea, we're going to offer this amazing banking service to whatever, and they build banks in months. And then they're online, and they can use some really clever tech. So I saw one the other day, it was really cool. So they wanted to onboard customers in like 30 seconds. and they had to do the KYC, so know your customer, and sort of all the identity checks. And it used a smartphone to scan your driving license and passport. Okay, taking a photo, and then you can check the details, look it up on the various databases. But it was actually using the infrared light and the near infrared cameras. So the cameras on your phone sort of do near infrared, and they can actually look through the layers of the passport. And statistically, it was more accurate at detecting fraudulent documents than a trained post office worker. So yeah, and I was like, that's actually quite clever. That is clever tech. And this was just an app on the phone, and they incorporated this third-party library that did this detection using the near infrared light of your camera on the phone, which was developed by someone else. But yeah, and they haven't quite got the onboarding down to 30 seconds, but it's like less than 2 minutes. It was pretty clever tech.
Wow.
And they can do that, right? Because they don't have this complexity and they don't have this legacy. So that's what, that's really exciting working with those companies. And then we go and work with the high street banks where, they're 6 years into a, 10-year migration project, and they're still trying to get off, a really old version of Oracle, and it's creaking at the seams. And, even basic queries like, how many customers in the UK have a credit card, a mortgage, and are over, are slightly overdrawn. It's like 2 weeks later they get the results back. It's really creaking at the seams, and it's so brittle. They're so afraid to touch it because it is complex, it is legacy, which then breeds, it's then become very brittle. You touch it, you break it, and they can't break it. This is a £2 trillion bank, or dollar bank. You can't break that. That's it. Game over. Done.
Yeah, so, exactly. It's really interesting. There's a client that we've done a lot of work with, and they've created, trying not to use too technical terms here, but almost a piece of middleware which cuts across a lot of different payment systems behind the scenes. And the company's just grown astronomically in a period of 3 or 4 years. And of course, everyone wants them. Having said that, it typically requires sign-off by at least 5 or 6 different heads of different departments, and probably the CEO as well of a big bank, because it's so mission critical that because it's almost acts as this glue behind everything, behind the scenes, that pulls everything together. You could have cash point machines failing, for example, if something went wrong. And of course, you mentioned about old code. I know that RBS NatWest, I think we talked about them earlier. I'm not saying that it's in private domain here, but to bear out your point, some of those systems are 30, 40 years old, I think. And of course, there isn't that resource anymore. If they are available, they're like gold dust, and those guys who do that coding, obviously make a lot of money. So it's just, it's really interesting. But I think also it surprised me as well how naive some of the very big institutions are. It's not just big institutions, small ones too. For example, even today, I think I had last week, a credit card company ring me up and ask me for full security details over the phone. And I said, why are you asking for full information? Why don't you ask for my month of birth or date of birth as just purely the date, or certain digits from that? Or why don't you ask for certain digits from my postcode? Or, why do you expect people to give all that information available? So I think probably, Rob, you're far too smart to allow this to happen. But most of us, if you were to do a Google search, you could probably find out in less than 5 minutes a lot about that person, probably including their date of birth. So there's a lot of information which is being asked for by these big entities when they make inbound calls. And of course, that could be anyone asking for that information. And then you've got the other scenario where companies are actually forcing you to log in to get certain documents. Now, you can understand why, because their systems themselves are secure. But the trouble is people are creating fake emails. We talked earlier on, but people are being asked to put in security information from an email. Well, how do you know whether that's a genuine email or not? Now, someone like yourself, and all right, I might know a little bit that you can access the header information, the email, the stuff. So the vast majority of people wouldn't even know. Yet, so these companies themselves, these large institutions, are actually exposing customers to unnecessary risk because they're not thinking of the whole experience, the whole journey. And as a matter of interest, what should companies be doing in those scenarios? What can they be doing to protect themselves more? But actually, even more importantly, to help customers avoid being duped into giving personal information away.
So it's a really interesting one, because the bank have had to up their game. They've had to, the amount of online fraud. I was reading an article the other day, I think it was from the National Cybersecurity Centre. No, sorry, it was from the RUSI, actually. It's from the Royal, what does RUSI stand for? The think tank in London. And they basically said that financial fraud was now a national security threat, because just the sheer amount of it. So you got the fraud side, and then you got the cyber criminality side, and in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, cybercrime overtook globally the narcotics trade. Globally, it's worth more money than the global narcotics trade, and that's $3 trillion.
$3 trillion. $3 trillion.
That's insane. Yeah. And it's just like you're going, so the sheer amount of cyber criminality, the sheer amount of fraud going on. So, everyone's having to up their game. So banks have sort of taken I guess, to your point, Rupert, a bit of a sledgehammer approach. We'll just keep asking you for more information to authenticate you to us, to make sure you are Rupert. But then you're, as a consumer, going, I'm giving away more of my personal information over the phone, and it's becoming normal. So it's becoming normalized. And to your point, it's like, it would be better to give partial correct data as opposed to, full information. And, the online bank, our business online bank, does exactly that. It only really ever asks you for certain positions in your password, and certain positions in your PIN, and certain positions in your other various bits of information. But I tend to find over the phone, it does seem to be almost quite antiquated. And I think I know the reason why. So take any large bank, their online banking phone system is a completely different system to the internet banking system. It's a completely different system to their in-branch system. And I know this. I've seen all three, and they're going, they're completely different systems. Yeah. Right. How do they know? Oh, we have to copy it over this green screen. It's just like you're going, wow, that's crazy. But that is sort of part of it. But again, legacy, complexity, inability to move with the times. So it's funny. So it's weird. Microsoft ring us up at Red Maple and say, you owe us money. You haven't paid an invoice. I'm like, scam, beep. And they ring back again. No, this really is Microsoft, and you really do owe us money. And I'm like, I just don't believe you. It's just like, we pay our invoices. There's very little you're going to do to convince me that you're right. But again, even Microsoft's process of like, well, okay, well, prove to me you are, and prove that you know something that you couldn't just get off a dark web and this breach alert, blah blah. And like, she had like the wrong email address. I'm like, well, hang on, that's not right. That's not even my work email address. And then like, oh, I can't send it to that email address. They couldn't send it to my Red Maple email address. I have to send it to this Google email address. I'm like going, why? That doesn't make any sense, because that's the email address on the bank account. And almost their own stupid processes started me to convince, you probably are Microsoft, because a hacker would go and try and get me to sort of go along with this a lot smoother and not make my life more difficult. So then going like, this probably is Microsoft, but I'm still not sure. So we'd set up some infrastructure for a customer, and I'd forgotten that we bought the licenses, but I didn't. I bought it with a sort of semi-anonymous email address, and I just forgotten, and it was sitting there, unpaid invoice. Eventually, they rang us up, but it took them a good 3 days to convince me that they weren't scamming me. Yeah, maybe I've gone too far the other way, but like, at home, and like. So this is my home office, and I've got a separate BT internet connection that I just use for work. I've also got a desk phone. I've also got, you know, an old-fashioned phone. But no one, I mean, literally no one, not my parents, not my wife, no one knows the number because I just haven't bothered to use it. You know, it's like, unless it was written on a Post-it note, I wouldn't even know the number. And yet I still get like 2 or 3 calls a day from like, you've been involved in an accident. You can claim your PPI. It's like it's always a scam. You know, I let it play through on the answer phone. You know, just for fun games. But I just like, you can guarantee that's a scam because no one knows that number. But like, then I go like, how do they know the number? You know, it's like.
I think what is concerning is that, as I say, some of these very large institutions are. I didn't realise. Took your point about the disparity between their systems, but you know they actually can be responsible for some of these problems because they are themselves tricking people or duping people or legitimately asking for information over the phone, which themselves is creating a security risk or via email as well. So I think it's a really interesting one. Renata, I know you're on here today, actually, and obviously I'm not sure how much you feel comfortable to say, but if you've got some questions for Rob on this as well, especially with your connections with that very large corporate, which can't be named, of course, but also anyone else who's got some questions here for Rob. Rob is here, is very keen to hear from you, so do interject in the chat, and if it's a really good question and we've got time, we might even bring you on for a minute or so as well to online. But let's see how we go. Just another sort of couple of things around that. As a point of interest, this also exposes another part as well. Let you take the example of that poor lady that got put in her details thinking it was a genuine request, and she accidentally revealed her personal information. In those type of scenarios, I suppose there's 2 questions really there. Is the individual themselves as a private person covered by some form of, are the banks obliged to protect the person in that type of scenario and reimburse them if money is fraudulently taken it out of the account, even if they've accidentally divulged their information? And I suppose the same question applies if you're a limited company or a corporate entity. If one of your employees, or if you've been stupid enough to get caught out with something like this, what remedies do they have? Can you get that? Are the banks supposed to, under their banking code, to protect the customer and make sure they get their money back anyway, or is it just tough luck and you're dead in the water? Any thoughts on that point?
So we had a client and we walked them through that exact scenario. They've been duped by a combination of social media and email phishing, and it was someone pretending to be the CEO of the business. And the CEO needed to make an urgent transfer. They were overseas on business, and they really were overseas on business because they posted on Facebook, they posted on LinkedIn, hey, look at me going on a plane to overseas on business. So they knew they were in wherever, Miami or something. So they crafted quite a convincing looking email saying, hey, the finance and account director, can you make payment to this bank account? Needs to be done really quickly. I'm with them right now. It's a great deal, and we're going to lose it if you don't do this. And they did it. And the way they described to us was the second they sent the money, they were like, something doesn't feel right. And within 3 minutes, they rang the bank and said, I think I've just done something really silly. Can you block that payment? And what happened was, so cyber criminals know that if you're scamming a UK target, you need to deposit money in another UK bank account, and then take the money from that UK bank account and then to send it overseas, because a direct transfer from a UK bank account to overseas, especially if it's a new transaction and a new account, will flag up quite a lot of fraud alert systems within the banks themselves. And the transaction might go through, but it wouldn't go through instantly. It might take, an hour or 24 hours, something like that. So banks' fraud detection systems are actually really quite smart and quite advanced. But in this case, it was a UK bank account to a UK bank account. It went through instantly, and the bank was like, "No, it's gone." And it was a UK bank, so it went into their fraud process, and it was a genuine mistake. But it was it wasn't like the bank account had been hacked. She hadn't given the password away. She made the transfer. She was on their, she was on their corporate bank account, transferring the money out herself. So the bank, it was the business's fault. Anyway, we worked with this client, and they got 90% of the money back. Within 2 weeks, they got half of it back, 50%, but I think was probably the bank's insurance paying out or something.
Wow.
And then about another 6 weeks went by, and the fraud team at the bank were ringing up and saying, this is what we're doing, and this is what we've done, and we've been in contact with the other British bank, and the other British bank has been in contact with the overseas bank where your money went, and blah, blah, blah. And they got back 90% of the money, and I think the 10% was basically sort of cover costs or cover the premium or something like that. But yeah, they got their money back.
Wow.
That was a British bank. So yeah,
is that a large part of goodwill in that case? In other words, were the bank obliged to do it?
I don't know the legals behind it actually. I mean, you're right. The British banks, under FCA, so Financial Conduct Authority, you have got a lot of protections, as UK citizens, as UK businesses, but also just as UK businesses, UK banks want UK businesses to succeed, and I mean, so it's interesting. So credit card fraud is astronomically high, but the credit card companies don't really care because they make so much money. They just write it off as the cost of doing business. They could have introduced CVEs 10 years ago. They've been in the back of your credit card for 20 years, but they only introduced it with like, we're now losing too much money ourselves. We should probably introduce one extra bit of security. So they did. There's no reason that your bank PIN number is 4 digits long. It's completely arbitrary. It could be 6, it could be 5, it could be 7. It's like, so it comes down to economics. It comes down to money. So our experience so far with the banks have been, it's a very tried and tested process. It went straight through to their fraud department. Their fraud department were professional. They knew exactly what they were doing. That client certainly wasn't the first it happened to. That fraud, that fraud system, that fraud team within that bank had direct contact to the fraud team in the other bank, and they were working quite closely together. That fraud team then, the other bank contacted the international, which was something quite a high-end cybercriminal, because it's in Switzerland. And yeah, eventually, well, I don't know where it came from. I don't know whether Switzerland gave the money back. I don't know whether the intermediate bank gave the money back. I don't know exactly what happened. All I know is that the end client eventually got 90% of the money back.
Oh wow, that's really good. And an example of a private individual where, for example, let's take that example you gave earlier on, and that obviously was able to intercept that. But that private individual accidentally put their card details in, and let's say a transaction has hit the bank account from now, several transactions hit the bank account. So are they, in the private case example there, would the banks have been obliged then to have refunded the payment? Or is it more of a goodwill thing that they're having to do it? Or they may have got some underlying insurance to cover it? For example, under the banking code, are individual consumers protected from those types of scenarios? Because it is a really common occurrence now, so people are getting duped all the time. So it's just answering that question.
So, I don't know the exact protection sort of for personal personal citizens with their personal bank accounts. So, I mean, under your sort of Consumer Credit Act, you got your credit card. So if you buy something on the credit card, you get a certain level, actually quite a lot actually, of consumer credit protection. Like say, if you make a mistake and not the bank, and you haven't, and you have been hacked, I think at the moment, fundamentally, it's down to you. Our experience has been the bank was very good, and the bank did manage to recover most of the funds. But you hear every day, on the news, on Jeremy Vine or whatever, thousands of other people weren't so lucky, and they've had their life savings stolen, they've had their pensions stolen, they've had their livelihoods ruined by people defrauding them. Every case is different. Could they done something different, or were they duped into it? When you combine very sophisticated attacks, you know, with people, you know, I was reading a horrible story about an older lady who lost her life savings. You know, they were ringing her up every day, and it took about 3 months for them to get her life savings. But eventually they did, because it was quite a big pot of money. You know, it was like £80,000 or something like that. And as far as I know, yeah, didn't get any of that back.
Really? Wow. Okay. We've got some great questions from, in fact, if you could say who you are in the chat, please, because if you're commenting from one of the closed groups, we don't actually get notified who you are. So again, if you could just say who you are, that'd be fantastic. I have got one other killer question, which I think people would love to have answered. It's possible this session today might overrun by about 10 minutes, if everyone's okay with that, including Rob, who's very kindly given his time up today. What I'll do is, just to give everyone, so we'll come back to those in just a moment. What I'll do is do like a little bit of a 5-minute wrap up in terms of what's coming up next week. And then if it's all right with you, Rob, we'll come back to you and we'll bring up these 2 specific questions and also this one killer question, which I'm dying to ask you at the end, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to share my screen momentarily, as it were, and we'll come back. So in terms of what's coming up over the next week, and just so you're all aware, and a little bit of a summary as well, as you know, we're very into encouraging collaboration and a referral mindset. And a number of you are regulars today, and you'll know that we're very interested in encouraging people working from a deep relationship of trust. And we also recognize that running a business can be a pretty lonely journey, whether you're a company of 1 or a company of 10,000. So there quite often could be issues where you don't have support around you. Maybe you're a director of a company or one of a number of directors, and you can find it difficult to confide in others. We want people to feel this is a safe place where we've got your best interests at heart. If you've enjoyed today, do set up a reminder in Facebook and YouTube, and also do share the page. That would be really appreciated. It helps us, increases the audience, means we can help more people and everything else that goes with it. And in terms of a quick summary, next week it's a normal session. It starts at 5 or 5 o'clock, just like it has today. But obviously on February the 11th, it's a double one, as it were. So we've got 2 sessions rolled into one. We've got a really great guest on next week, a lovely lady called Susie Mayhew. A number of you may have remembered Susie. Susie, through her experience, has worked with ultra high net worth individuals. When I say ultra high net worth individuals, we're talking about their asset value being over 120, 130 million pounds, and that includes working with several billionaires as well. She's also got years of experience in the events industry, and of course the events industry, as we know, has been hammered by the COVID. And what she's going to be sharing a lot of knowledge about is what now for the business events market for the UK and beyond, in, for example, the US and Asia and other countries. She's going to be talking about different types of events you could do and what, different outcomes. And we'll be talking a lot about understanding the key drivers, i.e. who you're reaching out to and why you want to reach out to them, and explaining about why drives the how, and why adaptation is vital, and is the future hybrid events. There's been a lot of talk about potentially events which are online and also real events where we actually can meet people again eventually, and also the winners and losers, how you're adapting your business model. And obviously a lot of people on this call today do provide coaching, mentoring, training themselves, or they run events, and so you may find a lot of what Susie's sharing be very interesting. And also next week we have our Kickstart 2021 mini conference. Now, the content is very similar to what we covered at the beginning of January, so you're very welcome to reattend. We're always very happy to be able to do that. But what we're going to be covering as part of that, just so you know, is we're going to be explaining how you can bring sales forward, amplify your brand, and leverage technology to give you your time back. And particularly, we'll be covering a lot around your ideal product mix and marketing mix, particularly to do with LinkedIn. Because LinkedIn is a really good source for finding clients. Over 62% of the sales that we get are from LinkedIn, and also some of the best partnerships we've formed have been through people we've met through LinkedIn. So in fact, I think Alex Rims on this call today, Chris Cooper, who regularly is involved with these live streams, and so many others we've met from a conversation started off with LinkedIn. And obviously we've got a technological solution which is designed to help you to scale your activities so you do generally get your time back. And to access all these good things, you can actually register for the mini conference from the homepage on our website. It'll take you through. Or if you don't have the time to take part in the mini conference, we've got a 55-minute on-demand webinar, which is a very condensed version of that. Still lots of value. And obviously, you can also access the online events. And rather excitingly, what's being very well received now, is we've created a sales and marketing diagnostic. Again, this is completely free. And you can, it takes between 4.5 and 6.5 minutes to complete. Renato, because he's such a clever guy, this guy, he actually managed to complete in 3 minutes and I think it was 56 seconds. So I'm not encouraging people to have a race with it. In fact, obviously, if you can spend a bit longer, great. But do see it as fun. And as part of that, we'll gladly follow up again. That's at no cost. And these are also the contact details as well. So I'm going to get back to Rob to ask him his questions and based on what you guys have asked as well. But if you want to contact Rob, his website is there. It's redmaple.tech. Rob's phone number is there, as it can be seen on the screen, which is 07525 369 931. And Rob's email address is rob@redmaple.tech. So do feel free to reach out to Rob. And what we're going to do now is to come back to those questions, and then we'll wrap up at about 6:10, if that's okay for everyone. So give me a second. There we go. And we'll zoom in on Rob if I can. There we go. No, I got that wrong. There we go. Got Rob back. Now, a couple of questions here. So give me a second. I'm going to try and bring them up if we can. Someone, I'm not sure who this is. Actually, I'll change the screen so it doesn't block us both out. This is a very big question here, actually, Rob. I don't know if you can read that. So from memory, 40% of business fraud comes from within. 10% of employees are inherently bent. Oh, God, that's quite a scary one. And another 10% are opportunistically bent. Will take the opportunity if it presents itself. Uncertain times like now create more disgruntled employees. What guidance do you have to employers from a threat within? Now, that is perhaps we keep this to no more than about 90 seconds or so, Rob, but can you try to answer that one?
So it's a great question. So I saw some statistics actually on supermarkets, where supermarkets expect about 1/3 of all their produce to get stolen. But of that third, about 80% is stolen by the employees. But they don't mind it because the employees tend to steal stuff that's about to go out of date, and they sort of have this weird sort of internal compass to say, well, you know, they're going to throw it away anyway. I might as well just take it. But in the cyber world, you know, there are comparisons. So Verizon write a very good report every year. The 2020 breach report is well worth a read. And in my sector, financial services, actually, the biggest security risk for financial services is insider threat.
Wow.
And accidental release. So most of the data breaches within the banks that got reported was people accidentally emailing the wrong client, people accidentally emailing the wrong file, or people deliberately downloading a load of stuff, you know, just before they leave and taking it with them out the door, you know, taking all the clients, taking all the customer lists. So that is the number one risk for financial services. Across different markets, those numbers change, but accidental and malicious insider threat, sadly, it is a real threat. I would say, you know, when we go into companies and we do audits, the first place we actually start is with culture. So people and culture is actually where we start. Because if the people and the culture of the organization is good and strong and honest and loyal and sensible, everything else kind of flows from that. So we do people and culture first, then we do, you know, governance and procedures, then we do tools and processes, then we do information, then we do technology. So actually technology is the last thing we actually look at. And you can always tell within about the first hour and a half when we start talking about the culture of the organization, whether everything else is either going to be great or is going to be awful. Because if the culture is wrong and people just are turning up, getting paid, and then leaving again, they're not following the processes anyway. They're just ignoring them. They're not thinking about how to improve the process. They're not thinking about So it really does start with culture. And it's not just good and bad culture. It's also the culture of like time and pressure and money. So like in a lot of businesses, we see that there's so much pressure on sales, or so much pressure on getting the job done, or so much pressure on responding to that email really, really quickly, and so much pressure to get, having your calendar full up with meetings, and it creates this stress. And then like if you want someone to click on a fraudulent email or accidentally click a phishing email, just put them under pressure, just put them under stress. They'll do it, and when they think about it, they go like, oh man, I didn't even know I did that. I was just an autopilot. I was just respond. So I think companies can sort of I'm not saying take the foot off the gas, but like just change that corporate culture a bit, and it has a massive impact on cybersecurity.
No,
it's the number one metric we measure. Everything else, the technology, the policy process, all that stuff, it doesn't really matter. I mean, like a few years ago, there was a whole theme around the human firewall, and the human was centric to all things cybersecurity. It's sort of waning a little bit, but there's a huge amount of truth in that. That your best form of defense is your people. That is true.
Lovely. I've got another question, which I must sneak myself. It's a bit of a question for that I'm desperate to know. But obviously, you got the this situation with the WikiLeaks. These leaks from quite a junior person within the American forces. It's of interest is that, without asking you to divulge anything which you probably feel uncomfortable to divulge, has that situation been sorted out? Because that was a relatively junior person that made all those secrets available via WikiLeaks, wasn't it?
So it's Chelsea Manning. So yeah, it was a he when that happened. I think now identifying it as a she. Yeah, I mean, so a classic example. So he was in theatre. And he had access. He basically had admin access to everything. So no separation of concerns and no separation of roles. He was in a supportive role. He was in a sort of administration role. So he didn't access information he shouldn't have, or didn't have access to information he didn't have privileges to. I mean, there is a whole need to know concept within government, within the military. So even though you do have access to the whole database, you shouldn't really go and read the whole thing. That's if you don't need to know the operational details of another operation, you should respect that. But it was very interesting because there's a huge amount of social engineering there as well, because he got chatting to someone online who turned out to be quite notorious hacker. And it was almost by chance. And this hacker, over a series of like months and months and months, effectively talked him into doing it. And he was obviously complicit in it. And he was lonely. He didn't fit in. He didn't get on with people. He struggled to make friends. And he was in the middle of a desert. He was getting shot at. It wasn't a particularly brilliant time of his life. And yeah, over a series of months and months and months, they cultivated the relationship. They got a huge amount of trust, and he basically didn't email. He sort of messaged over PGP, which is an encryption protocol, a load of data. And then this guy happened to know, and I think it was actually sort of friends with Julian Assange, and it ended up on WikiLeaks. And then the guy who did all this got arrested. And he's now a massive advocate of what I did was wrong, and he massively regrets it, and he wished he'd never done it. And he's actually a public speaker now, and we'll talk about everything that's happened in quite a lot of detail. And yeah, he went to prison. He got arrested by the FBI. Life came to a crashing end. But yeah, now he's a security advocate, and he does talks all around the world. And
wow, so he's probably making a lot of money from it as well.
There's a really good documentary on Netflix called 0 Days. It's about Stuxnet, but it interviews this guy at length as well, and you get a real insight to that whole relationship. So yeah,
look it up. So what's the name of that again?
0 Days. It's by
Zero Days.
0 Days. It's by Alex Gibney, and it's on Netflix, and it's a really good documentary. If you want to understand cybersecurity at the sort of state level, state on state, and sort of the big cybersecurity, yeah, really good documentary.
I'm going to ask you another question. You may not feel comfortable to answer it. Okay, could that same thing have happened over here?
Well, I mean, look at Edward Snowden. Look at Edward Snowden and the data that he breached. I mean, yeah.
The bottom line is yes.
It's happened. It already happened. Edward Snowden. The logic is that he leaked an enormous amount of highly classified information from both British and American intelligence services. FireEye lost their red teaming tools. The Italian hacking group lost all their hacking tools. SolarWinds got breached by some really sophisticated threat actors, and SolarWinds software was installed in the Department of Energy in America that looks after their nuclear missiles, and nuclear power stations. It's just like it's really happened. These things really happen, and it can be tough out there.
I've got two more quick. I'll say quick. I'm going to try and make them quick. We've got someone else. A bit of competition here between Nikki, Alex, and Renato, by the way, and I'm not sure who this is from.
This is actually from Nikki, I believe.
Right. Can we deal with this one quite quickly or not? What do you reckon, Rob?
So it sounds like the banks should refund the money, which is good. Consumer protection for fraud and identity theft. If bank thinks you may have affected fraudulently or negligent, they can delay. Well, they refund, which is certainly the experience we found, and this shouldn't take more than a few days. Yeah. So to be fair, we got the client got half the money back within about 7 days, and they got the full refund within about six weeks. So yeah, maybe that's the metrics they should live up to. But yeah, sounds like consumers are protected for fraud. I imagine there's some small print somewhere around. I
did mention to Renato probably come up with an interesting one. Can you read that? I'm just trying to work it out. So yes, it's still best. Can you? Good luck with that one, Rob.
So yes, is it still best to be able to physically disconnect by pulling internet cable, turning off wireless when your home network does not need to be connected? Also, like those companies I deal with who point out that the profile where the client's network is normally connecting and everything new is blocked until they prove it. Ultimate security is, as Rob would be aware, some UK government units who only connect to public internet with separate computers behind glass screens, and the ... So so your classic security of don't be on the internet is real. It's how critical national infrastructure deal with security. It's how other high security government institutions deal with security. In the home, in the business, it's that classic convenience versus security. Usability and availability versus security, confidentiality, integrity. I've got a Siri HomePod over there, literally just on my printer. Downstairs, we've got an Alexa.
You can't say that word. I'm going to have to say Siri and Alexa. Yeah, a minute.
The Amazon-based helper. My wife uses Google. I use Apple quite a bit. The world is very connected. We are incredibly interconnected, and we are incredibly interdependent. So I don't know if you remember a few years ago, 2007, I think it was, the big floods we had in Gloucestershire. And there's a big flooding around Tewkesbury, and Tewkesbury's got a cell phone mast that basically sits just above a floodplain. It's also got a substation that sits just above a floodplain. And the cell phone mast gets powered by the substation. And the substation got flooded, so the power was gone. And then the cell phone tower had a diesel backup generator that had about 7 days worth of fuel. And if that generator had stopped and they hadn't got power back, then that tower would have gone down. But that tower was also quite a critical, called ABIS, which is an inter sort of tower telephony system. If that had gone down, then basically most mobile networks would have gone down in the UK. And the scary thing is no one knew how to bring them back up again. It's never happened. And it's an interdependent. You need power to power the cell phone, but you need a cell phone signal to turn the generator back on again and turn the substation back on again, because the substation is run remotely over the phone network.
No. And of course, it just happens to be not that far from a certain GCHQ, I guess. Is that right?
Well, yeah, it's not far away. Just down there. So Gloucester, Tewkesbury floodplain. I imagine they're right. I imagine they've got quite a few
backup systems there. Yeah.
More than one grid, but no, it's a really interesting use case where they genuinely it's never happened, and we genuinely don't know how we would get it back working again. So interconnectivity, interdependence. We live in a very convenient world where everything is digital, everything's online. You just have to be that little bit more careful about security.
Yeah, they're lovely. Mira, I know what you're going to say. Remind me just a minute. And then we'll make that the final thing. Now, there's one question which I think is a very nice one to wrap up on. Then Muriel's got a little bit of information to share as well. How is the landscape changing? What next to prevent the unthinkable happening? Again, perhaps a 90-second version of that, if that's possible.
So the big changes we've seen in the last 15 years, I'd say, is mobility. Mobile phones are ubiquitous. It's mobile first, mobile first now. By that I mean, Google released Chrome as an app on their phone before they released Chrome on the desktop. Everyone's on a laptop. I'm on a laptop. We're all mobile. Whether I work from home or in the office, it makes no difference. Public cloud has enabled that in part, in big part, and we've seen huge moves to public cloud. What's next? Big data analytics, machine learning, and AI. This will be transformative to pretty much all businesses, certainly all digital businesses. It's been transformative already with cybersecurity. You've seen Darktrace, you've seen Palantir, you've seen Rupert. Big successful companies using AI in the cybersecurity space. So I think that's what's next, is much greater use of machine learning and AI across all businesses, health tech, legal tech. Anything that uses digital data will start to make use of machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Thank you very much.
Including cybersecurity.
Including cybersecurity, do you say?
Including cybersecurity, yeah. So anomaly detection using AI is a huge thing. If you look at any vendor right now, the problem is right now it's very buzzwordy. We do AI, great. Do they really? It's worth sort of checking and digging into it. But they're all looking at it. They're all spending a lot of money looking into it. So anomaly detection of unusual behavioral networks, unusual traffic patterns, etc., are all actually very good use cases for artificial intelligence.
Rob, thank you very much. We'll come back to you in just a second. But Rob, Muriel, is this about what this article, this court case recently?
Yeah. Okay. So this is to do with business interruption insurance. Do you want to take over, Rupert, or do you want me to?
But just if I summarise very quickly, Muriel, thank you for reminding me about that. And Muriel shared this with me, actually. There's been a lot of cases, instances where businesses have been seriously out of pocket because they've taken out some form of interruption insurance with their insurance companies of business interruption insurance. And a number of insurance companies that have been turning around and say, tough luck, I'm sorry, the COVID and the effects of COVID and loss of business is an excluded event. Well, in reality, that they got away with that for a while. It's gone to the courts several times, it's gone to the Supreme Court, and apparently now I understand that there are potentially is a basis to go back to your insurance company and say, I'm sorry, but there's been a Supreme Court ruling, you should be paying out. Now, this is a big subject. I don't know anything about it particularly, but what I would just simply say is if you're a business that's been affected by what's going on and you've been told no by your insurance company, then just go back. And obviously bear in mind, again, correct me if I'm wrong with this, but some of this might be affected certainly by some of the regulatory bodies. It might be by Financial Ombudsman Service as well. So whatever you do, don't give up. If you think you've got a case, don't give up. And I'm sure there's different class actions probably go on around that at the moment. If so, almost certainly it's not the end of the story. Muriel, has that fairly summarised it in a very short time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Rob, I just wanted to say I'm very grateful for you coming as a guest. We failed abysmally, or not you, I failed abysmally today to make sure this sticks to time. But I think at the end of the day, you were sharing so much value as part of this conversation today. So I personally want to say thank you very much for today. And also anyone who's taking part today, I think it's become very obvious that Rob is quite an expert in this space. If you do have a particular challenge in your business or know of a business which is really going through it at the moment, Rob ultimately is your man, and you need to speak to him, and he will, I'm sure, look after you extremely well. So I want to just say thank you very much for taking part today. Thank you very much indeed, Rob, and Muriel, and of course everyone for all your comments and feedback. I love a bit of friendly competition with Nikki and Renato and Alex. That's good. Keep on doing it. Okay, take care, everyone. Have a great week. Thanks.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.